Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Last time, lots of plot happened. A lot of it. We learned quite a few things. We learned that Samson was super strong, much like his rival counterpart. Edward was a little bit antsy, but a really good person at heart. And we learned that in order to save Annie, Fergie sacrificed himself for the greater good, which was wonderfully done. However, now we're on the run from the Vandor troops. Though despite them not being able to get through the passage, they're still able to break through pretty quick. Not that that matters much to me, because you could spend hours in here and they still won't have caught up to you. Which is actually pretty helpful, considering right now my people are kind of low level. Not to mention, one of them is a magic user and doesn't exactly have a lot of strong spells yet. So he's kind of dependent on the other party members right now. This doesn't help that Samson is cursed and part of his fighting is sealed off due to the paralysis. So yeah, my party has seen better days. But that's okay, we can handle it. The enemies in here aren't exactly all that tough. You could probably come in here and we're fighting a level 3 or 4 party, and you can still survive easily enough. Just don't get in over your head, that's all. Let's see. You might notice that I got an item called the Resist Jewel last video. Do you remember how I said I wasn't going to use any tricks in this game? Or any exploits, so to speak. This is one of them. Normally, this item is supposed to half magic damage for one battle. But due to the code within the game, what it actually does is half magic damage the entire game for some reason. If you don't care about abusing exploits, this is pretty useful. Since you can pick one party member, and they're essentially good at tanking magic damage. But only one person. Now later on in the game, there is a secret shop where you can buy these things. And at that point, this game can effectively become twice as simple to play. I'm not going to do that for the simple point that, well, I'm trying to make this as fair as humanly possible in terms of difficulty. And if I start abusing exploits in this game can get really easy really fast. I will show off how to do some of these exploits though, in case anyone's interested. Because there are a lot of them scattered throughout the game. That makes this game a lot easier than it really should be. Also, it's worth noting that a lot of enemies in this part of the game are weak to fire. Which is pretty nice, since fire is about all Edward has in terms of attack damage. It's pretty cheap too, so that's nice. He does get better spells later on though. Do keep in mind, however, magic spells do take a while to learn in this game. So if you want the really good ones, you're gonna have to grind a little bit. But I don't have a problem with that. After all, it's not like this is the first game series to really make you earn your very powerful spells. Dragon Quest 1 and 2 were essentially like this. If you wanted the really good stuff, you had to earn it. Unless you wanted to wait till later in the game to use it. Which, in the case of Dragon Warrior 1, wasn't recommended. There were other methods of getting stronger, but a good portion of Dragon Warrior 1 was very dependent on your spell selection. As a matter of fact, some places were almost impossible without it. But I digress. Also, as you saw in an earlier video, you can sell the Ring of Defense for over 7,000 gold, which at this point in the game, effectively makes you rich. Yeah, that's pretty nice. Let's see, I'm trying to think of if I got anything else that could be really abused. I don't think so. However, this next dungeon I'm going into is a giant tree. And it has our first introduction of dungeon elements. This dungeon element, it has a puzzle where you push these weird wood rock things. I think they're probably supposed to be roots of some kind, but they look more like rocks. So, you push these rocks around in here to plug up holes, as I'll demonstrate in a second. Also, this place loves to throw kobolds at you in battle, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. They do have a tendency to run away, but if you kill them before they run, you get lots of gold, which I assure you will be useful later. I'm going to try and preserve on Edward's magic in here quite a bit, since going through this dungeon is a bit lengthy, and there are some pretty strong monsters later on. Kobolds also drop herbs, which I am thankful for. Since Annie is really my only healer at the moment, and well, let's just say that while her healing is useful, it's not unlimited. So for the good part of this game, you're gonna try and preserve it as much as possible. Thankfully, herbs aren't that expensive, so you can pack a lot of them. And I just plugged up a hole. This dungeon is probably the first one that'll really test your metal as a Beyond the Beyond gamer, because the enemies aren't exactly easy to kill sometimes, and because of how long it is. Also, there is no real method of traveling back and forth in this game from town to town very quickly until much later on. So, once you actually go on a journey to go somewhere, you usually have to make it all the way through. I think this is really one of my major nitpicks about this game, is not having the ability to do that does hamper the experience some. Because if it turns out you can't actually beat a certain area, you can't exactly warp back to town if you're having problems. You do get a spell to leave a dungeon, but you can't warp back to town, so you've got to hot-footed there instead. There aren't a whole lot of areas that give you trouble though, so it's a minor nitpick at best. Let's see. I really don't think there's anything I need to talk about Edward, since he's not a character that's going to get a whole lot of character growth throughout the game, but I will mention some of his character bits when we get to a later time, because he does get some scenes to himself. I think they focus a lot more on Samson in this game over Edward, since his character actually goes through a lot of interesting scenarios. And yes, I'll be getting into those at a later time as well. Because Finn is the silent protagonist, I don't think we see too much with him in the way of not so much character growth, but character progression. Oh, by the way, I got Illusion level 1 just now, and that spell is just about useless in this game. It's essentially the same thing as Surround from the Dragon Warrior series, but it's not near as accurate than in those games. And very few enemies have strong attacks anyway, so it's pretty pointless. I can't remember for a fact, but I don't think the main character has even learned to heal yet, which is, I guess, another minor nitpick. The hero in this game is essentially supposed to be like the hero from most of the Dragon Warrior games, But this particular hero takes forever to learn anything that could be considered a support spell. Most of his spells tend to range from being very lousy support spells to being minor damage spells. Oh boy, we got ourselves an interesting little group here. 2 enemies that can use poison and 2 enemies that can use sleep. In this game, I don't really want one to think about which one is worse. Sleep is annoying in most cases because it usually gives enemies a chance to whomp on you for a little bit, which later on is a huge deal, because when enemies start using magic, it gets pretty bad. Aside from the residual, there's really nothing else you can do about magic damage, since this game is kind of lousy about giving you special armor that reduces it. I think there's a couple pieces of armor that does that, but you don't get all that often, and it's usually just ignored. I'll try to cover those a later date, but because I'm not exactly sure about what does what in this game anymore, I may not remember. If anyone out there is familiar with this, then please let me know. Also, I freaking hate pushing these rocks. Mostly because they pick like the worst areas to put the rocks. A lot of the times you have to double around in order to push a rock in a certain direction. Ugh, this gets annoying very fast. Also, I freaking hate these goblin enemies. They can do a decent amount of damage with their weapons, and they tend to come in large groups. So unless you plan on using magic with these guys, things can go pretty bad. Though if I recall, I think I get pretty lucky here. Don't hit Edward. Don't hit Edward. Thank you. Alright. And then he did a super attack, which was totally unnecessary. I still have yet to show off the other types of special attacks, but I think I'm gonna wait until I'm in a much safer location. Well, you tried, Edward. Wow, I got lucky in this fight. Edward could have died so many times that, well, not died, but he would become groggy. Which at this point in the game isn't something you really want, since your character's LP are still kinda lousy. Also, it doesn't help that Samson gets really low BP, and he's in the front row too, so if any enemy decides to really whomp up on him, they can make him groggy pretty fast. Combine this with the fact that Samson really isn't all that fast, this really doesn't help things. I think Samson is really the one you really have to worry about if you're worried about them constantly focusing on one person. Especially since, even if you try to defend him during battle, sometimes the curse will downright ignore this. Because he can sometimes be paralyzed, and thus the defending would not count. Personally, I think that's kind of stupid, considering defending should ignore the abilities of the curse, like it can in other Dragon Warrior titles, but I digress. Thankfully, the paralysis doesn't occur as much as you think, so it's not a big deal. Let's see. Also, it's worth noting that I'm really under-leveled for actually being in here. I think they really expect you to be more like level 5 or 6 with everyone. But I really didn't want to focus too much time actually leveling up, at least not this early. Because it might give people the wrong impression about actually progressing through this area. Because you really don't need to be that high of a level to survive, it just makes it easier. And I wanted to demonstrate that. Of course, the game would also probably expect you to use Edward's magic a little more often than I do in here. But I didn't want this to be one of the first times I would die. Because I have bad memories of going through this area. My first time going through the game, so I did not want that to happen again. Especially since there's actually 2 segments to this part of the game that you have to go through, which really doesn't help. The second area is not that big, but you can get lost pretty easily if you forget where you've been. Since it's one of those dungeons that kind of loops around, which in this game is one of the main reasons I tend to get lost. Because a lot of the dungeons later on do have sections that loop around, and sometimes I'm just unaware of it. Yeah, when Camelot's creative team made this game, I really don't think they were aware of how to make really good dungeon designs, which I can understand. I mean, this was Camelot's first ever RPG game, which is actually something I need to talk about. The Other Beyond was actually the first turn-based RPG that Camelot ever made. Their other games at this point basically reprised of just the Shining Force games, and a couple of off-titles, most of which are actually strategy-based. The combat they use is a bit original when it comes to strategy games, but a strategy game is still a strategy game. So when they made Beyond the Beyond, and they decided to make it turn-based, they were kind of going in new territory here. They did put their heart and soul into it though, so I will give them credit for that. However, this will go a long way in explaining some things we're going to see later. Oh boy, will I have some things to talk about later. Yeah, there are some things in this game that I particularly don't like. And one of those things you're probably going to be seeing very soon. It's not enough to make me hate the game though. The game is still fun as crap, and you're never going to get me to believe otherwise. It's just that, knowing what I know, you gotta go into this game with an open mind. A really understandable open mind. Because, as much praise as I give this game, it is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But that's okay. I really don't expect it to be. Okay, the counter jewel I just got, if you use it during battle for a few turns in that one battle, your character will have added chances of countering, essentially. Which is nice, but I don't think I'll ever use it, since countering in this game really isn't as useful as one would think. Also, be careful going through these holes, because there are chests on the bottom of this area, but if you go down the wrong hole, you're going to miss out on it, and you cannot backtrack from this area. So if you miss the chest, then you're either going to have to reset your game, or wait till much later in the game before you get this chest. Because you have to walk all the way around the world in order to get back here. I mean, I suppose there is a method of getting here if you wanted to take the long route, but I don't recommend it. You just have to hope you're not unlucky with the holes you choose. Source of life. Yeah, you don't want to miss out on these things, trust me. Of all the sources, I think the life ones are like the most abusive. Because life does not come very often in this game, especially with your mages. So that's nice to know. Well, we're finally at the tree. Unfortunately, we're not at the woods just yet, because there's a mountain in our way. So we have to go through a cave. Fun times. Oh, and by the way, the enemies get worse too. All of the weak groups are essentially gone now, and we're stuck with just the really strong ones. Which is why I decided to save my magic until now. Yeah, we're gonna see goblins a lot more often now, which is annoying. Though you only have to survive them for a very short time. So if you're still in good shape at this point, you can probably make it. Just don't get lost in here. I also got the spell Ice, if I recall, which it's essentially Ice Bolt from Dragon Warrior, but the MP cost is not as convenient. While Ice Bolt costs, I think, like 3 in the Dragon Warrior series, Ice Level 1 costs like 5 or 6. Which means you can drain your MP pretty fast by using that. So I won't be using it all that often. Though I think I will use it more than once, just to show off its usefulness. Thankfully, Ice isn't really all that special until much later in the game. Because you won't see any enemies that are weak to it for a long time. There are a lot of enemies that are weak to fire, though. Some people actually say that Ice is preferable anyway, just because the sheer amount of damage it can do will rival what fire can do, even if it's weak to it. But I still like to use fire because it's cheaper. And because of how many enemies that are weak to it, you're really not missing out on much. Also, I think Edward is one of the few characters that has the slowest usefulness curve. Learning curve, as they would say. That doesn't make him a bad character, though. It just means he's probably going to be the one that stays in the back of the front lines for the good portion of the game. And I show off Ice. It does 13 damage on a natural basis, and Fire does like 6 or 7 on a natural basis. So it's twice as strong, but not that many enemies are weak to it. Also, it's worth noting that the enemy groups in here usually tend to be pretty big, which is why you're going to see me use magic a lot in here. Because I don't want to keep these enemies alive where they do lots of damage. Because that kind of sucks. But that's okay. I love the enemies in here who don't do that much damage. Just take out the goblins. However, there is a new enemy in here, and I can't remember if I see it or not. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else worth covering. Oh, by the way, some people did say that when they first look at this game, it reminds them of a glorified SNES game. To be perfectly honest, I don't really see it, but I guess I can understand people seeing it that way. Because while a lot of graphics in this game do impress me, there are certain portions of it that kind of remind me of some games like Lufia 2, or see, what's the other one? I'm not reminded of a Final Fantasy game when I look at this. Final Fantasy VI, bless its heart, tried, but if there's anything that I disliked about 6, I think it was kind of the pseudo 3D effort. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still love Final Fantasy VI. It was one of the better titles in my honest opinion, along with Final Fantasy V, but the pseudo 3D graphics that Final Fantasy VI used, I kind of feel like were ahead of its time. I really didn't like them all that much. I think I can appreciate them more now, but when I first played, it really hampered the experience. I recently got off from playing Final Fantasy IV at the time, and it was a huge step in the next direction. Honestly, I kind of felt like with Final Fantasy VI, they were already preparing for what would be Final Fantasy VII, where the graphics were just so much better. I really don't like it when video game companies take this approach, though, because it kind of makes me feel like they think that graphics are the only reason we like their games, instead of other things like storyline and character growth and stuff like that. When that's really not the case most of the time. And yes, Annie just got Holy Light level 1, which is essentially a holy attack spell that only she gets. Well, okay, not only her, but you won't see it again for a while. So basically, it's Annie only for right now. It's pretty good, since it hits a groove for pretty decent damage. It's basically fire level 1, but on a whole group. And it's pretty cheap too, so that's pretty convenient. Anyways, back to my slight rant on people calling this a glorified Super NES game. I really love this game's graphics, since it kind of feels like they were going kind of for good graphics for its time, but they didn't overdo it. Like, the graphics never overstay its welcome, if that makes any sense at all. And not once in this game did I ever feel like they were trying to overdo the graphics and overshadow everything else, which I love. Very few video game companies actually do balance with everything in their game. Usually the game is more about the storyline, or it's more about the characters, or it's more about the graphics. Very few RPGs balance all these categories out. Oh yeah, Beyond the Beyond has an awesome kickin' soundtrack, if you haven't noticed already. So that's even better. Well, we're finally in the Zalagoon area, and Zalagoon Castle was just to the right and north of this cave. Phew! That was quite a ride. And yes, I know, I'm probably gonna get flack for dare to say that Final Fantasy VI isn't perfect, and I'm ready for that. My opinion on Final Fantasy VI isn't exactly the popular one, so I'm sure I'm gonna get taken into this, but yeah, what else is new? Anytime we bring up a Final Fantasy game, it's basically open for debate. So I just have to hope for the best. You might notice that Reimu said that we wouldn't get any help if we went to Zalagoon. This is technically not true, but I'll get into that when we actually maybe the King and Queen. You also might notice we're fighting an enemy called the Demon Hornet. They're essentially a slight upgrade from the Killer Bees, I think they're called. But they're not really all that hard. But I think they can do paralysis with their powder. So you might want to be careful for that, since it doesn't automatically wear off like sleep does. And it's not a slight inconvenience like poison. I think I have all the status effects. I think paralysis is one of the worst ones you can actually get. Though confusion is even worse, but we won't see that for a while. Oh, you piece of crap. Jeez. Thankfully, if you counterattack right after being poisoned, it doesn't count as poison damage, which is a plus. Do keep in mind, if you want to abuse Holy Light, carry lots of healing medicine with you. Otherwise, things can go downhill pretty fast. Yeah, Advisor Glade is kind of a dick. Then again, so are most advisors to the king in RPGs do tend to be kind of, well, dickish, to be honest here. Personally, I don't see the logic of what that old man just said, since the Bandor Bridge was pretty much guarded, but Bandor still got through pretty easily. So I don't see his logic with that. What makes this Zalagoon Bridge so special? Are their army just so much better? Yeah, you're doing a bang-up job, buddy, since I would be able to walk right in and look inside the barrels without him doing anything. Oh well. Funny. Yeah. What tension? Yeah, there's a lot of tension, alright. Most people don't even know what's going on. I'm sure you're just supposed to assume that there's a lot of tension, but the town really doesn't show it all that well. Again, why do people think that? It's not like there's a huge, like, border that's stopping people from crossing the bridge or anything. Bandor could crush wherever they want. Okay, well at least that guy's being realistic. Also... really? Is that bad? How do they plan on stopping that? Do they have guards watching over the shops to make sure they don't sell to anyone? I don't get that. Plus, their economy must be terrible if they're banning people that aren't straight allies of Zalagoon. Just how many customers would they get? Well, to be perfectly honest, it's not like the people are slaves here or anything. They're just becoming more militaristic. And it's not like people are really complaining about that, it's just... they're saying things are getting worse. Though, with Bandor taking over Marion, you'd think that people would be a little more understanding over that. I mean, sure, becoming more militaristic, like martial law, would kind of suck a little bit. But until you can stop Bandor, it's kind of understandable, really. Mind you, that doesn't explain why the shops are being stopped, but whatever. Let's see if we can get some info from the king. And now we actually get some plot in like half an hour. Okay, quite a few things to talk about here. First of all, are you freaking kidding me? Anyone could look at this advisor until he's supposed to be evil. Seriously? Secret, huh? That's right, we're going exploring. Apparently, saying, look around our beautiful Zalagoon essentially means the plot isn't ready for you yet. But we do have access to the shops now, and boy, are they improved. We can actually get swords for our sword users, and we get a huge selection for our mages, Annie and Edward. Edward came with just a wooden rod, and if I would have had some hindsight, I would have bought a better rod for when he joined up, but it's really not necessary. Although I have to admit, I was running kind of low in cash at this point, and I barely had enough for all the weapons. But that's pretty good. Now I need to buy the armor, which isn't quite as expensive, but it takes a decent amount. And I'm selling the helium ring, because it's kind of stupid. Also, do keep in mind one thing, that some of Samson's equipment upgrades later on lower his speed. Yes, lowers it than it already is, so that can be annoying. I'm trying to sell as many items as possible, but I may regret this later. Also, the counter orb and counter jewel are probably going to be sold. Not that this is a bad thing, since rare items that you cannot buy from other shops, you can buy back from the item shop, if they're really that rare. Which I actually kind of like. In most games, if you sell a really rare item, then you are never going to get it back. So I really appreciate that option in this game. In hindsight, I think Samson would probably be the one that would benefit most from armor. But he doesn't get that much of it. Oh well, he gets enough. I think for every 2 defense, you take 1 less damage from enemies. So the more defense, the better. And now time to go into the annoying sewerway. Yeah, the sewerways in this game, it can be kind of confusing. When I first played this game, I hadn't played a Dragon Warrior that allowed you to go into different wells, so this was new to me, and I thought it was pretty cool. Now, this game has, or shall I say this place, has a weird current running through it. If you go into the water in the wrong area, the current will take you back to the beginning of the sewerway. So, this game, this place, practically requires you to memorize where the current is at. Thankfully for you guys, I have this place memorized, otherwise this would get pretty annoying. Oh, you suck. Yeah, zombies love their poison. But they're not competent fighters, so that's not so bad. These types of enemies will get annoying much later though, when they start using other stats effects. Yeah, you have to be smart enough to know where to go through the wall. Dirty water and maggots. Well, you can't say they're not being realistic, though. I have to give them that at least. Flying mice. This is another creature type that will become much more annoying later on. But this version is pathetic. It can only attack, and doesn't do its job very well. And it gives you a decent experience and gold value for it just being one enemy. So that's not so bad. Spinning tails. These enemies are cute. They really don't have that much damage, though they are pretty fast for their time. Plus, they have no elemental resistance, so ice is best used on them. If you want to kill them fast, anyway. Also, I think this is a good time to explain how levels work in this game. Whenever you gain a level, you have a default amount of stat points that you get. Ooh, source of magic. And the game takes it upon itself to give you a random stat value for each stat point. Depending on your class, it will determine on what priority the game takes when it gives you your stats. Since Samson is a fighting type class, he essentially will focus more on strength and well, that's it, really. It's just the only stat he tends to get a lot of. While Edward the Mage focuses more on MP growth than any other stat. And classes like Finn's, that is average class, will get average stat gains in every area. I kind of like this system, since it's not near as well, generic, let's be honest. A lot of the games don't have a random value for their level ups. And in the case of Regular Warrior 3, your stat up were directly linked to the stat you had already. If you had like 30 vitality in that game, and you didn't have 60 HP at that current level, then you would have 60 HP at the next level. Guaranteed. There was no random values at all, you just got a certain amount of stats at your next level, depending on your personality, not counting the NES version. And that's usually just the way it was. I really prefer the way this game does it, personally. It really reminds me of Fire Emblem, where your stats are kind of random, but they do follow a certain statistic. Like, Samson would get an 80% chance of getting a lot of strength, and Edward would have an 80% chance of getting a lot of MP. The only main difference between this and Fire Emblem is that you would not get more than one stat from level ups, I think. And each stat would just have a certain percentage of going up. Whereas this one, they limit it to just 6 or 7 stat points. Which I admit I probably like a little bit more, since at least now, with this system, you can't really abuse it. Yeah, it was way too easy to abuse Fire Emblem's stat gains, especially if you used resets. This was especially true for stats like attack, speed, HP, like Fire Emblem was just too abusable. Beyond the Beyond can be abusable too, if you make sure speed goes up with every level, like I've talked about previously. But later on, this just makes the game way too easy, since later on you could essentially spam spells with all your party members, and the enemy wouldn't get a single turn. On the other hand, this also means that if the enemy does have magic itself, and it's faster than you, then you're going to get your butt kicked. So, there's that to consider as well. I'm going to hope that situation doesn't happen very often later on in the game. Otherwise, you're going to see me dying a lot. Because I'm not abusing any exploits, and the enemy's magic hurts later on. There is something I can do to really help this though, and I don't know if I'm going to do that yet. I'm not going to spoil it, because it's a pretty big deal later on in the game, and I don't think it's worth talking about yet. But since this video is almost over, I'm going to wait on that. Stupid screensaver. Anyway. The rest of this video is basically me just farming gold for the rest of the equipment. And I'm going to continue the plot in the next episode, because there is a decent amount of plot to be seen in the Zalagoon section. Afterwards, though, the plot seemingly comes to a halt until you get to the next major area, which I won't be getting to for quite a while. This is more like the exploration time of the game, where the plot just stops and you can just soak in the adventure, so to speak, and I kind of like that. Easily the most exciting part for me is this part of the game, where you're just going through the frontier, so to speak, and it's just awesome. I won't ever stop loving this game, I'm sorry. I just love this game so much. And I know I have some people that actually say that they appreciate this game as much as I do, and I was not aware of that at first. I honestly thought that this game was hated, even amidst the mainstream RPG crowd, not mainstream, but the old school RPG crowd. I thought even they hated this game, but apparently I was wrong about that. Since people are really open-minded about this game, and some of them are actually watching the Let's Play. Really cool. It kind of makes me feel a little bit better about actually doing this game. Because this is not the first time I've attempted this Let's Play. I did this once already, way back, like I think a couple of years ago. But I did eventually stop the Let's Play to do it full-on stream. Since at the time, more of my friends were streaming than watching Let's Plays. So I did that instead. The problem with streaming, though, is I couldn't get any recording to work. And by the time I realized this, I had already done like 4 episodes worth of recording. So I couldn't have continued that Let's Play if I wanted to, unless I wanted to start all over again. Which I didn't. Because that would be a lot that I would have had to make up. Because I was like halfway through the game at that point. This has actually happened to me several times, where the recordings have failed and there was no way to make it up. So that was really annoying for me. I think that happened during my Wild Arms Let's Play, that is also gone, because of YouTube and its crap. I really just don't like it when recordings just don't work out, especially if it's a game where I don't have access to save states, or an alternate way of saving. I've heard of people using kind of a leapfrog system where when they're recording, they record on an alternate save file, and they keep that file until they're sure that their videos are recorded. And that's an approach I'm actually using right now, because I do not trust my recording software. So yeah, there's that. And I believe this is where I stop for the time being. So thank you everyone who is watching this. You guys are awesome. Next time we're going to progress in the Zalagoon area and hopefully get some help from Zalagoon. Though with Glade Around, I don't see that happening. See you later.